Yo, yo. So, the basic idea when you're trying to get an internship is that you start early. You don't want to delay the process because if you delay, you might miss out on the opportunity, right? So, also, especially with getting involved on campus early, that's something else we talk about too because when you are getting involved on campus, you first are building your resume. So the longer that you're involved, the more content you have on your resume. Also, if you get involved earlier, you just get to explore more on campus. So like what you could do is say spend your first semester, you start getting involved your first or second semester, you could spend that time maybe exploring different clubs or student organizations that maybe you want to join, and then you can bounce around between different clubs and student organizations. But then also there's the idea of you just gain more experience. You're gaining more experience, and then you have the potential to rise into a leadership position over time. So you start as like a general member of the club, and then by the time you reach junior year, you maybe have the opportunity to have like a leadership position or just have a more expanded responsibility, and that can also look great on the resume when you start early.
Yeah, and starting early too, we talk about looking for internships the beginning of your freshman year so that you can try to capture an internship
Right.
for after your freshman year. And if you join earlier, then you can start gaining college level experiences earlier if that student org is doing activities that first semester where you're involved in that student org that first semester. Then there's an opportunity for you to take part in some projects, build some skills, do some things that the org is doing that fall semester that can go on your resume that will help for fall career fairs or spring career fairs.
So that's a good point too. Like when you if you're trying to get an internship as a freshman, you getting involved early gives you some more recent and relevant experience to put on the resume. So we did have a question. What was that first one? What is mechatronics? So mechatronics is like a mix of mechanical and electrical. That's a honestly, without going into too much detail, that's really the best way to put it. You're doing IE. How is the major post grad? So that's an interesting thing. We were looking at like reported salaries
Yeah, reported
earlier
salaries
today.
from Purdue University. That's where I went. I studied industrial engineering at Purdue. Reported salaries from Purdue, and the reported for industrial engineering. I don't know where like the whole data collection is coming from, but the reported that we saw off of the website was just over 80,000 for engineering in terms of his salary. Of course, like you don't know if that's like all the reported data or what the reported data was coming from. We
Right.
don't have like the exact methods in there, but it's just a number that we saw.
But I think the interesting thing in this report was that it was almost exactly this the average reported salary for the IE industrial engineering grad student was basically the same as mechanical. Was that what we saw? They
Generally,
were
from what I
very
remember, I
similar.
think so. I think so.
So they were very similar. There wasn't too drastic of a difference
But how the
in the
major is
report we saw.
post grad though, how the major is post grad, I think like there's a lot of opportunities to like career opportunities that IEs can go into. In my experience, you have your supply chain, you have your logistics, process manufacturing. I think data science is also a route that was talked about in my, I think anecdotally, like in my experience at Purdue, that some IEs were interested in, but also consulting too. And we kind of like in terms of going through the internship recruiting process for consulting that happened also. So IE in terms of like opportunities post major, I think it's a pretty broad field, which is pretty good in terms of the opportunities post major. I felt like I had like a lot of different interests. I got internships in a lot of different roles, supply chain oriented roles, program manager or project manager oriented roles. So yeah, it's pretty interesting.
So here's a question: would you recommend biomedical engineering? I think that's an interesting question because biomedical is a little bit more specialized than say mechanical or like electrical. It's sort of like aerospace, where aerospace is very similar to like a mechanical degree, except it's aerospace. Maybe you it's a little more focused in the aerospace industry. The biomedical is, I would say, if you have an interest, a definite interest in going into like the healthcare field or working on biomedical applications, it could be useful. But that said, I would consider, if you're considering biomedical, also consider like electrical or mechanical or even any of the others, because if you're interested in, say, working in the healthcare industry, any of those others, mechanical, electrical, chemical, there's roles within the healthcare industry for all of those as well. So biomedical isn't like the only way to go into that industry if that's why you're thinking of going into biomedical.
There's another question here. What minors do you recommend for industrial engineering? I think we talk about like what minors to pursue just in
I think
general.
it's up to you. There's a couple different
Couple different
options.
ways to like look at it. Well, there's the way that I think about it, Matt. You can add here, but like there's two possible ways that you could, or two possible goals that you can have with your minor. Number one, going deeper into a specialized field within your major, or number two, going broader to expose yourself to fields outside of your major. So, like a classic example could be like if you study mechanical engineering, having a minor in robotics as like a subset of mechanical engineering to show a very specialized, focused interest in that particular field could be interesting. My personal experience, I did industrial engineering major, but then did a minor in management, which was, I'm pretty sure it was management, which was outside of industrial engineering, outside of the technical engineering space, and was more business oriented. So that's where I was looking to go and take my major and do a minor that was broader than it rather than narrow. But I think there's two ways.
Yeah, and I think another thing too, though, is if you're getting a minor, one thing to think is that you're taking more classes, right?
Yeah,
So
if you can, sometimes you could pair minor classes with like electives that you might have to take.
right, so there might be some overlap between what you can do.
Depends on
towards
your
major, but
depends
then
on the school.
depends on the school. But either way, you may find yourself having to take more classes, and that can be a little challenging. I know for me, I studied electrical and did a bit minor in business, but the math minor, if I were to do that, would have only required like one or two extra classes. So that's something to take into account. You study EE at Rutgers. What do you suggest to get internships? So to get internships in general, from a high level perspective, if you're looking for an engineering internship, one thing that's really important is just having experience on your resume. So what we talk about is things like getting involved on campus as a way to build recent and relevant experience on your resume.
How can someone get involved on campus? What are the ways?
Yeah, so there's a couple different things. We talked about this yesterday. One thing that you can do is find student clubs or student organizations, and that's great because it's not too difficult to get plugged into those. So it's usually pretty easy. You could find online, right? Also, another thing too about that is you might be able to find more technical organizations on campus. So some schools have like race car teams or things like that allow, or like rocketry teams that allow you to get pretty hands-on with some more technical tools. And when I look at students' resumes, when I review resumes for students, I think that's a pretty cool thing to see because you get to see some hands-on experience with tools that sometimes are used actually in industry. That said, though, there's a couple different things as well. You can look at like undergraduate research. So if you can help a professor with research. That's another way that you can get involved. Another thing as well is research, a teaching assistant. If professors have like an opening for an undergraduate teaching assistant, that's another option as well for getting involved on campus. So there's quite a few different things. Otherwise, though, like if you're looking to build your resume, if you have like a part-time job that you're working or like you've worked in the past, that definitely can, go on your resume. It doesn't, like if you were a lifeguard, worked at a grocery store or at a movie theater, you may think like this does not relate to like my major, but it shows responsibility and it shows that you used your time productively.
And when you have those experiences that you think might not directly relate, one of the things that you might want to look for is what we call transferable skills, which is skills that you can take from that experience that might not be super obviously transfer. Well, maybe they can be obviously transferable, but if you have like a part-time work experience that you feel doesn't relate to like internship opportunities that you're looking for, one of the things is take a look at the experiences you do have. What types of skills did you demonstrate there? Can any of them apply to the role? like, does teamwork apply to the role? Something like that. Like, can you pull from your experiences that you currently have? How can any of the skills that you develop there help you for the role you're trying to get?
So an example I like to give of this is, let's say that you're looking like an internship, right? And they have a software like SolidWorks as a skill that they'd like you to have, a qualification, or another three like software that's used for CAD modeling, right? And you don't have experience with that software, right? Let's say you don't have experience with it, but they want it, and then they ask you, and thank you for the likes. They ask you for it, or they ask you about it in an interview. But let's say you have experience with a personal project and you enjoy 3D printing things, right? And you're creating models, right, for what you're going to be printing off these 3D printers, and that's what you do as a hobby. You still have experience with kind of like the overarching skill of 3D modeling. And so that's where you could potentially, in an interview where maybe they ask if you have experience with this specific software, they say, and you're like, you really don't. You could say no, but I have experience doing this, and I think I'd be able to learn that pretty quickly. So that's how
That's
you kind of
something
leverage
like,
transferable skills.
if you were in that situation, you might bring it up that way.
Yeah.
There's a lot more.
So we are about like let's say 88 messages behind right now. So we're trying to skedaddle through these pretty quick. Let's see. Oh wow, it just jumped down to the bottom of the questions. That's all right. That's all right. Let's see.
They just scrolling fast.
There's a lot of questions. Chemical engineering opinions. I think so. If you're looking at like choosing a major, my general advice is just choose a major that interests you and aligns well with your goals. You don't want to be picking like the wrong major for the wrong reasons. Just choose the one that aligns well with your interests and your goals. So, for example, I studied electrical, and the reason I studied electrical was because I had taken the AP Physics C class during high school, and that electricity and magnetism, and that's basically physics 2. So after liking the content in that class, I just thought I got to learn more about this, and electrical was to me the next best way to learn more about the topics in that class. Mike studied industrial,
but was originally looking at electrical. So Purdue has a first-year engineering program where you don't exactly declare your first year. So you go in kind of in this general engineering, they call it first-year engineering. And at the end of that first year, you kind of like declare your major and what you're going to focus. Like it's all in engineering, but then you declare like your engineering discipline. And that like heading into that first year, I was thinking to myself, like I'm definitely ready for electrical, or not ready, but like I was definitely wanting to do that. But then learning that whole first year, being open-minded about it, talking with, some people who were older members of like student organizations and what it was like, I ended up moving towards industrial, and it was a really hard decision. I mean, you know that. That I was kind of like weighing a bunch of different options, my interests, and what I liked about each different major, and ultimately went industrial. So just kind of talking about our past there. More questions?
I'm going to answer this one quickly. You're doing computer engineering. Should you double major in EE? Honestly, it's up to you. Kind of like we just said, go with what kind of aligns well with your goals. But that does sound like a pretty intensive combo, to be honest. I know some people do like the one is an undergrad and then another is master's. But my take is that does sound like an intensive combo, but some schools do like offer it as a double major because there is a lot of overlap. So you might be able to take advantage of the overlap between Comp E and EE in trying to get that double major. What type of work do you do at a supply chain internship? I would say supply chain is a pretty broad term. So to be honest, it just it really depends on what exactly it is you're doing, because when you think about supply chain, there's roles. Supply chain could be, manufacturing material, manufacturing products, delivering products. logistics, transportation. There's so much that goes into supply chain. It's kind of hard to narrow down. Um, Thoughts on studying electrical overall? So electrical, I would say, I liked studying electrical. Like I said, I studied electrical after taking the AP Physics C class, and that was just the best. Studying electrical was the best way to keep learning the material in that class. I really liked it. I just thought, wow, this is pretty cool. The circuit stuff. I remember one of the things that really caught me was this lab where we basically built like a speaker. We took like a magnet and then like an audio jack and plugged it into the phone. It was like a magnet, audio jack, wires spun into a circle and put onto like a paper plate type setup. And the paper plate kind of turned into a little magnet, or not magnet, speaker. So that was one of the things that really caught my attention. Do we have a podcast?
We do.
So you can check it out
Yeah.
on YouTube. We're as Destination Internship on YouTube. We just had 500 subscribers there today. We're starting to do that a little more. We also post, or are starting to post, recordings of the lives on YouTube as well. So if you go to Destination Internship on YouTube, there's right now I think there's one from yesterday, and then there's one that's about 30 minutes, and then one from the day before, which is about 60 minutes.
So I have another question here. What are some ways to get prepared for starting we'll just say starting engineering in the fall? What would you say some ways to get prepared if you're an incoming engineering student?
Actually, we do have on the podcast the rest of this week, starting either tomorrow or Tuesday, maybe tomorrow. Yeah. Like several episodes on advice for freshman students. So definitely check out Destination Internship on YouTube. We're going to be posting those up probably like one a day over the next couple days of just general yapping away on advice. But so what's some ways to get prepared? One of the things we talk about is I don't think we talk about it. We talk more about just advice and things to expect. But one thing that I say when you're trying to get prepared is, since it is something super easy and more like kind of fun, and I know you did this when you were starting, is just going online and trying to find what clubs and student organizations are at the school. And I just when I give advice for things you can do, I try not to give things that are too intensive, because the next 4 years or 5, if it takes 5 years, are going to be pretty tough. So I'm not going to try to put a lot of work on your plate. But if you do want to do something, have some fun going online trying to find out what clubs and student orgs there are.
Yeah, that's one of the things that I did during the summer heading into freshman year, and I got the opportunity to join a student org that really got involved right away in the beginning of the semester, and that gave me a lot of experiences. Like we talked about this earlier in the live, a lot of those college level experiences in the student org to be able to, I think, I can't remember exactly what was on my resume when, but I'm that I probably would have been able to put on my resume at the time. So some student orgs, and we talked, I think also there might be different fairs for joining student organizations, like involvement fairs, where some of these student organizations, of course this depends on the university, so you might want to take a look into it, but where there might be fairs where different student organizations will set up booths or set up tables to be able to talk about what the student organization does, and be able to answer any questions in case you might be interested in them. One of the things that we talk about is being involved in some of those extracurriculars, so that could be a good way to learn about what student orgs there are on campus.
And I think that's definitely a good way, like you did. You sort of researched it and were able to get involved right away. That and we talk about this a lot, just getting involved early as a way to just start building your resume ASAP once you get on campus. And then another benefit of that we talk about of just getting involved early is that you can, over time, of course, get more experience, but your responsibilities expand, and then you have, in some cases, opportunity to rise to leadership positions. and that can also look pretty good on the resume.
There's another question about is an internship after freshman year very important? Maybe we can rephrase this to like what are the benefits of getting of looking for an internship after freshman year? Because you can either get an internship after freshman year or not. But would you, if you were looking for an internship after freshman year, what are some of the benefits of getting one if you do land an internship
So
after freshman year?
if you do get one of the benefits is that if you do well, it could possibly turn into a return offer. So then once you go, so let's say that summer between freshman year and sophomore year, if you do well, if you get an internship, you do well, you could be invited to intern the following summer again. And if you accept that, you can then go that entire next 2 semesters, entire sophomore year, without having to worry about getting an internship. And
Or the
that
following
that can be really useful, not having to deal with that.
But it also adds that industry experience onto your resume heading into sophomore
Right.
year recruiting cycle.
And so the thing is, and the reason that's important is because just pretty much due to the fact that you're 1 year closer to graduation, like every year, you get closer to graduation, companies will be more interested in you, bringing you on as an intern because you're closer to graduation. If you think, let's just say, just arbitrary number, engineering has a 50% dropout rate from freshman year to senior year. If they bring you on as an intern, in theory, if they bring you on as an intern as a freshman, there's like a 50% chance you drop out and can't join them full time after you graduate. But like that likelihood of you being available to join the company full time after graduation, in theory, increases. The sooner they hire you as an intern, like the sooner you are to graduation, at the point they hire you. As an intern.
If you join as like a
Yeah.
junior to a senior or a sophomore to a senior.
Right. So like the point I'm trying to say is that there's a much
You're closer to graduation, which means you're closer to
Right.
full-time employment.
and so that's it, yeah. And so the point is that companies, what a lot of companies try to do with intern hiring and intern programs is build what's called like a talent pipeline, and it's just a pipeline of talent that they could maybe expect to join the company full time after you end up graduating.
And then there's other benefits for just looking for an internship during freshman year, even if you don't land an internship offer. Number one, at least getting experience talking, giving elevator pitches, and perhaps even interviewing, but also going through applying. Understanding like applying online might actually take like a good amount of time to do. Knowing where to look and having like your own type of strategy or systems in place that you like to do in order to be able to look for internships, so that when you're in your sophomore year, you might have a little bit more experience. And you're already familiar with the recruiting process, so it's less new to you. Also, one of the things that I noticed just in terms of on-campus career fairs was some representatives returning at the same company, like returning to the fair year over year.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you talk to the same representatives at the same company year over year, you can start developing that professional network with some of these representatives that could potentially be helpful later on.
Yeah, so it's all about like just putting in the reps. So if the way we had got our internships, 3 ways. One was the on-campus career fairs. Second was just applying online, and then third, networking. So those are the 3 ways. And so let's just take the on-campus career fairs for example. Let's say you take those career fairs seriously as a freshman. You go to one in the spring, or you go to one in the fall. Let's say you go to another one, and then another one in the spring, right? And let's say you do put in all this work, but you don't get an internship. Okay, what did you gain from that? What you gained was just familiarity with the process, so that the next year, sophomore year, you already have experience going to those career fairs, talking with the employers, that you are at a huge advantage compared to the other students in your class who didn't go to the career fairs. And even the students who are a year older than you and waited until junior year to go to those career fairs.
You're just more experienced. If you
Yeah.
do it more, get more experience in the recruiting process. We have another question. How much does GPA matter? How much does GPA matter? Let's take this question: how much does GPA matter for getting an internship? Do you want to take that?
I would say it depends. So GPA is important, but then also experience is also very important. I say there's a reason that like that education section on your resume is the smallest section, but like your experience takes up the bulk of your resume. And there's a reason for that. And I would say some companies though do have like minimum GPA, so it's important to keep that in mind. It all depends on the company though. Some may have like a 3.0, a 3.2, 3.3 are ones I've seen. I think like 3.5, some companies have that. But then in general, the general sort of advice is that once you meet the minimum requirement, if there is one, what starts to matter a lot more is the experiences on your resume, which is why earlier we were talking about getting involved on campus, things like that, to expand on the experience section of your resume, because that really starts to take precedent once you have an okay enough GPA. So that's sort of the take on GPA. How about this? Should you return? I'm not sure if this was even a question. Should you return to the same internship summer after summer, or should you switch internships? So personally, for me, I switched internships despite having return offers, and the benefit, that's just sort of how it unfolded for me. But for me, the benefit was just being able to explore different companies, different industries, and different locations. That said, there are some advantages though of staying at the same company time and time, like summer after summer. You just get past the learning curve, and then you can get more familiar with the company, the way it works, the people. And if you like the company, you like the people, you like what you're doing, that's great. And then if you do end up joining full time, you can really hit the ground running and take advantage of all that experience. But did you find another question up here?
Yeah, if you don't have an internship as your freshman year, what should you do over the summer to prepare, or just recommendations for what to do over the summer?
So a couple different things. Basically, the idea is you want to return to school in the fall with more experience, more skills, just a little bit stronger of a resume than you left school in the spring, so that you don't get behind some of your peers who are working internships. That said, couple things that you can do. You can take, and one thing you can do is you can take coursework. I think there's obviously like a cost involved in that if you do take courses over the summer, but maybe that frees up later semesters. Other thing you can do, part-time work. That, again, even if it doesn't relate to your major or like the technical work that you want to do, say during an internship or full-time, it's still going to show employers you spent your time productively. You'll develop skills, things like demonstrate skills like communication, teamwork, things like that. Otherwise, personal projects, if there's a project you've been wanting to do, that's something you can look at. And then another thing too, when you're looking at like skills, you can consider like there's plenty of free online certifications that you can get or courses you can take for specific skills. So there's different universities have that. I believe like Harvard or Stanford have free online courses that you can take to help develop new skills. So that's another option. Just spitballing a couple different ideas for skill development. There's a lot of questions we're scrolling through. We both actually during the SpaceX internship, we actually both the offers were actually for the same exact location and during the same exact summer. So actually we were fortunate enough to be able to room together at that point when we worked those internships. We both worked internships at SpaceX.
Can you talk about electrical engineering? Share a little bit more about like you studied it, you majored it, just general thoughts about electrical engineering?
I would say electrical engineering is definitely tough. Electrical engineering, what you notice in the junior year and senior year especially, is it starts to be very math heavy. It tends to be less physics, and a lot of it's just applied math. So once you get to those more more senior, junior level classes, it's definitely a lot of applied math, especially at classes like controls, signals and systems, things like that. Definitely lots of math. And if you're thinking about studying electrical too, it obviously depends on your curriculum, but I know for me, there were definitely a good number of labs that I had to take, and those all took quite a lot of time during the week. I know industrial, you've mentioned, doesn't have much. In your experience, didn't have many labs.
Yeah, in my experience, just I have friends from other majors doing like different labs. I felt like industrial didn't have like the same number of labs. I'm not exactly sure how many, like the count of labs, but I think that might have been one of the difference. I think that I would say a good amount of applied math in industrial though. I mean, that's always been one of my things, was interested in mathematics. And I liked some of the math that was involved in industrial engineering, and some stuff that I was looking to learn, and industrial had that. So part of the reason, not the whole reason, but part of the reason why I was interested in that. A lot of opportunities for industrial engineering. So consulting is one opportunity that, in my experience, I've seen a lot of my peers in industrial engineering being interested in consulting. Personally, I was involved in a consulting organization on campus, one of those student organizations related to consulting. And I think that's one of the, I guess the thing about industrial engineering is it could be like a broad range of fields that you go into. We talked about this earlier in the live. Consulting, I feel like a lot of engineers though can go, like it's not necessarily, consulting is not just an industrial engineering thing.
No.
But you know, that's just an option for industrial engineering, but you also have the supply chain, you have manufacturing processes, process engineering, a lot of different roles in there for industrial engineering.
And then any major, you could look at any consulting firm and probably find tons of people.
I think
any of the engineering, but there seems to be a lot of, right now at least, industrial engineering students trying to go there.
Yeah, let's see. Or I think like it just, in my experience from industrial engineering, it seemed like my peers were interested in it. Not all of them. Everybody has their unique interests. Just people I knew in the major. What is the difference between aerospace engineering and mechanical engineering?
So a lot of it's very similar, except you might learn things a little bit more with an aerospace application. That said, a lot of people generally recommend like electrical or like mechanical, just because it's a little bit more broad of a field than aerospace. Some people will argue that aerospace is like niches you down into sort of the aerospace industry. That said, from like a skills perspective, we talked about like the transferable skills earlier, and you generally can do a lot of different things with an aerospace degree, but just from a from the perspective of just absolute mobility and flexibility, generally like something like mechanical or electrical may give you a little bit more optionality. But I mean,
I think another question too about biomedical engineering, I think is like a similar.
Yeah.
Is a similar case with biomedical engineering to mechanical engineering and electrical engineering.
Sort of, yeah.
As aero to mechanical.
Sort of, but aero tends to be more like it's very similar to mechanical. And that said too, an interesting thing with electrical, and this is not related to that question. Electrical is actually very broad, a lot more than I think people realize, because the thing with electrical is pretty much like any industry that a mechanical can go into, and electrical also there's also a position for an electrical. But then also with an electrical, you have the different specialties, whether it's like RF, signals, controls, electronics, power, things like that. So there's a wide variety of different sort of things that you can specialize in when you're pursuing electrical. And then the podcast. So if you go to YouTube and look at Destination Internship, we have a replay of yesterday's live, a replay of the live before that, and then we're going to be putting up podcast episodes soon. And there's like two or three there. All right, we are running on time, so we're gonna try to find one more question to do before we gotta jump because it is getting kind of late. There's a lot of questions. It's hard because all the questions keep rolling in, and it's hard to like. So how about this? Should you return to the same company summer after summer, or should you switch it up? So that depends. Personally, I would say one of the I jumped around from company to company, despite having return offers and being able to go back, and that's just how it unfolded for me. One of the benefits of that was just being able to explore different companies, different industries, locations, that type of thing. Now, in terms of if you were to stay at the same company summer after summer, if you end up returning to that company full time, you're likely very familiar, like when you're about to start full time, very familiar with that company, how they work, how they operate, and you can probably hit the ground running pretty quick.
I know in my experience. So did you ever like return?
No. But
okay.
Yeah, but I had the offers too.
So
Opportunity to. Yeah.
okay, so I had an internship at one company after freshman year. Then I had a second semester sophomore year co-op for the spring semester. That was at a different company, so two companies. The third different company I worked at was right after that, so summer after sophomore year. And then in the fall of junior year, I worked at a fourth different company, and I stuck with that fourth company for fall, spring, and summer because I knew at that point like that was.
And so some students will either bounce around or stay company after company, and so it all depends on what floats your boat. One thing too is if you, I think I mentioned this earlier with freshman students. If you get an internship after freshman year and you work that internship, one of the advantages is if you get a return offer, you could accept it and then know you're going back to that company the following summer and not even have to worry about internships the entirety of sophomore year. But anywho, that about wraps it up for today. And if we weren't able to answer your question, you can go into one of our posts, leave a question there, and try our best to respond there or maybe make a video about it. But that said, if you want to see the recordings for the past lives, you can check out the YouTube at Destination Internship. Also going to be uploading episodes this week for the podcast on advice for freshman students. So, all right, hope everybody has a good night, and see you later. Bye-bye.